being a parent seems not to have much to do with being a lawyer, about which I've spoken a great deal, perhaps ad nauseum. Being a parent has a lot of parallels and is very important. Being a parent is, simply put, responsibility. The responsibility to a client, of course, involves trying to determine ways to solve their problems, come up with alternate means to achieve goals without problems, to be good to them, courteous and kind, and all the other things that a human being should be, although in today's political climate that doesn't seem to be the case. In any event, responsibility to the child involves, or is essentially, being good and kind and loving to the child, and also interacting. You know, when he or she first crawls across the floor, to scurry after them, or play hide and seek when they're real little. I can remember my child sneaking under the dining room table, which had a full-length cover on it right down to the floor, and he would hide there. Of course, at that age, around 2, it's not till after that, if they're not in your sight, they don't exist. So, of course, he thought he was really hiding, and so was shocked when I would lift up the tablecloth and giggle. I'll never forget that giggle. I miss it terribly. And I also remember, all of this is about close contact. They call it bonding today. Well, I guess it is bonding. But putting music on and picking him up and dancing with him, and him laughing and having a wonderful time, and his mother in the kitchen cooking, because that's what women did in those days, and dancing around and bouncing up, and then throwing him up above my head. That probably wasn't very smart, but he adored it. He just loved it. And then I believe I mentioned the picture we have of him sitting on my lap, his back against my knees, and me reading a book. I had just come back from one of my marathon trips around the world or wherever I had been. And my relaxation has always been reading. And he was participating in that in some sense. He had a rubber, whatever you call it, in his mouth, sucking away because he was getting his teeth. But he was perfectly calm, seemed to enjoy it. I look at that picture and I have guilt because I should have had him sitting right on my lap and playing games, etc. But if you look at it closely, he seems to be quite content. I mentioned, I think, throwing him up in the air, which wasn't very smart. But boy, did he like that. Wow. The other thing is, as a child grows, and hopefully the parent grows, which isn't all that common an event, that the parent begin to understand the child's interests. And I'm a firm believer that whatever the child's interests are should be left alone. If he wants to be a car mechanic, if he wants to be a physicist, if he wants to be an artist, fine, let him practice that or get into it, because that's his native talent coming out. And so many parents try to force their children into something. I know my parents hated it when I sat upside down on a chair, my back on the seat, my feet up above it. We don't do that. Well, why not? You know, it's fun. I think they wanted me to be a lawyer or decided to be a lawyer, it was great festivities, I don't know which. But I became a lawyer and I got a tremendous amount out of it. And I hope my son did too. I hope he gained knowledge of other parts of the world that otherwise he clearly would not have. But going back to responsibility, it is truly the responsibility of the parent to raise the child, to show him paths that he couldn't find on his own, to expose him to joy, to help him figure out how to get out of tough situations. I love my son intensely, and we've had a discussion about whether he knew that, and he swears he does. But he's an extraordinary young man, extraordinary. Talented intellectually, socially, I don't know, because of course we don't run around together, but very kind to everyone he knows. And I know it's appreciated. I certainly appreciate it, because I see it as a little reflection of how I raised him. His mother and I, of course, because she's a very dear person. And it couldn't have been easy living with her in another country for several years. And I know when he came back to the United States, I was on the California coast. And there was a guest house that's some friend's house. And he lived there, which was great. It was blocks from the ocean. It was just beautiful. And I had missed him greatly. And he would come visit, and we'd sit around and talk about his adventures or mine. And all this guilt welled up in me about not being there when he needed me. When that was, I'm not sure. But we spent a fair amount of time together. Didn't get along very well, I must say, at times. And he pressured me. He'd say things, this is not true, but to give an example. Well, Dad, you're always saying the earth is round. It's not, it's flat. And of course, that would get me riled up for no reason. And my friend Marcia Williams, who had 4 boys, oh, God forbid, said to me one day, that's a problem, but I learned, just say to your son, well, you bring up a good point. I hadn't thought of that. But I have a doctor's appointment that I'm late for. Let's talk about it later. And she said, I got to run out the door. And she did. And of course, the child completely forgot about it. And I tried it a couple times. It seemed to work. But I realized that my son had come back to the United States after being abroad for 8 years, maybe. And we had not been together in that time, really. I was in one of his countries one time, maybe, or 2 times. And so we hadn't had that chance to so-called bond as father and son. And that's difficult enough, believe me. And I'm not saying just for the father and for the son. All this was compounded by anxiety throughout my entire life, actually, which young people don't suffer as much today, although I'm sure there are a lot of them that do. And I had a great deal of depression. I think that contributed to it significantly. And a psychologist asked me the other day, well, when did you first have episodes of being depressed? I said, when I popped out of the womb and looked up, and there was my mother. So my life was not happy. My son made me happy. My wife made me happy. My friends made me happy. But the family knitted together didn't make me happy, except my grandparents, who were truly extraordinary. So all this tension, all this angst, I guess, reflected itself in my relationship with my son, who felt it. I know. He must have. Children do. And I've always felt guilty about that. And I know a lot of different people. They're different. They're black, they're white, they're this, they're that. And I get along very well with them, and I respect them, and I hope I'm kind to them, and they're kind to me. That's the way the world should be. And that's the way you should be to your son as a father. Good and kind and very interested in what they're doing, very supportive of their interests. Again, if they want to be an artist, a physicist, whatever, a scrivener. Saying the word scrivener reminds me of what I regard as a very funny story. I was in a meeting in New York, everything very formal. It was probably the 80s or early 90s, when everyone wore a solid yellow or red tie and a navy blue or a dark gray suit. Not doing that anymore. Anyway, we were drafting an agreement, and somebody said, well, how about adding this language, whatever it was? And I said, oh, that's good, and I wrote it down. And I looked up at sort of the head of the other group, and I said, oh, so-and-so, did you get that? And he said, Mr. So-and-so, I am a wordsmith, not a scrivener. A scrivener being one who, ow, my nose. A scrivener being one who copies other works. You've seen old manuscripts that have been copied by monks and so forth. That's a scrivener, he just copies. The wordsmith comes up with the words, the very important words. He creates, and he thinks he's a lot better than anybody else because he can create. And in those days, he may well have been. But this fellow gave off the impression that there wasn't any doubt that he was better than anybody else in the room, and that his creating language was vital. The deal wouldn't have gone without him. Well, ridiculous. His attitude made the deal almost fall apart. But that's the kind of approach and attitude you cannot take with clients, with people on the other side of a deal, with your children, certainly, with your friends. You're not better than they am. You're different. You're not better than they am. Good language, Bob. I guess I'm a scrivener. You're not better than they are. You're just different. And I am different than every one of you. And you are different, I was going to say, than every one of me. I'm not really multiple personality. You are different than me, thank God. We have all kinds of people in the world. And I think that is vital to our survival as a race. And this guy, there used to be a word snooty. Probably a lot of you hearing this wonder, what's that do? Does that have to do with the nose and mucus? No. It has to do with putting your nose up in the air and looking down at people. Well, he had a problem. In any event, all this is to say that responsibility to your child, to everyone, is vitally important. In today's world, when you have a child, and real joy in having that child. I do, being honest, feel that I failed in some of those respects. But you do fail at some things. and accept that you fail at some things. You're not going to be perfect. You know, the baby's going to burp and spit up. But responsibility is the entire, to me, the entire subject matter of raising a child, which covers all the aspects that I talked about. You know, responsibility to give them joy, to give them happiness, to see that they grow in the way that they should. And I don't mean physically, necessarily. My son used to eat all fruit one day and all meat type stuff the other day and all potatoes the next. Some people say, oh, that's not responsible, not a balanced diet. He ate what he wanted. And I regret a little bit, a lot, that I didn't let him, somehow I prevented him from following his true calling in life. I think he's on that path now. And I absolutely, to the core of my heart, believe he is going to achieve what he wants to achieve. And that's the key. What your child, what she wants to achieve. That's it. End of story. You let them follow their path and they'll do just fine. But you will worry. Oh, you will worry. That's for sure. Oh my God, he's out and it's almost 3 o'clock in the afternoon. But that's my treatise on responsibility as it might be connected to being a lawyer. You're responsible in life, generally, to friends, to clients, to acquaintances, to your neighbor, to everyone, to be good and to be kind and to be fair. Our society seems to have fallen apart in that regard. How sad. But you can make a difference. You can start today. And I encourage you to do that. And start with your children. That's the crucial thing. That's going to make a difference in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Dad. I think that was very plain spoken. And thank you for trying to be a good father for so many years. And I just wonder if you have any advice that crosses your mind for me in the future.
Don't be like I was.
In what sense?
Be nicer, be kinder, be more believing.
Believing in what?
In yourself, in me believing in you.
So you mean that we should basically have an irrational, positive bias toward our own futures, because if we don't, we're condemned to failure. So
you said it perfectly. I hope that was recorded.
It was. I'll take that to heart.
My son and I differ on things like a lot. He regards optimism as pessimism and pessimism as reality.
Well, I just try to be a realist.
That's what I'm saying.
And I think you're optimistic, so you think I'm a pessimist, but I'm actually just a realist, and I base my decisions on facts and science. And
Let's not go back into that again, okay?
Fair enough.
All right, is that enough?
That's great.
Was it okay?
Ask the viewers. I think it was great.
Okay.
Very plain spoken, straightforward.
Ask the viewers when they come out of the theater.
Thanks, Dad.
Okay. Thank you.